everyone to today's webinar, and we're going to be looking at the best ways to use artificial intelligence in the contact center. Delighted to be joined by two very good speakers today, joined by Dr. David Naylor from Humanotics. And David, I think your doctorate isn't one of medicine, that is actually a doctorate in artificial intelligence, I believe.
It is indeed, yeah, from it's going on 30 years ago now. Yeah, so this is not a new subject, a new field. It's just that the industry has been picked up by the media, and yeah, there have been advances in recent times which have really sort of pushed it forward, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But I never thought 30 years ago when I left, well, 25 years ago, and I left sort of research into artificial intelligence and joined a practice developing call center services in a consultancy, that the two would come together as they have done. But it's really interesting to be able to bring both aspects of sort of my background together.
I guess that's due to sort of, I guess, a combination of factors. One is the huge increase in computing power, but possibly also the huge amount of data that is about, because certainly neural networks, I think you're going to be talking on, are very, very data hungry. So so you're getting almost a sort of Venn diagram of those two bits coming together. Also delighted to be joined by Stephen Kennedy. Stephen, you're the head of pre-sales for eGain, and you've been with the company for quite a long period of time.
Yeah, that's correct. I've been here for 7 years. I've been in this space from a knowledge management AI perspective for about 20, starting out my life doing customer contact center work, helping customers and trying to find a way to improve it. So, and now I'm on the other side of the fence, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, I think it promises to be a very exciting webinar. Just a reminder that you can watch the replay later on today, and you can just download the slides after the webinar. We're carrying on the discussion today in our chat room. That is at callcenterhelper.com/chat. And you can log into that. And we're asking the question in the chat room, which is, what has been your experience of using artificial intelligence? Very easy to get into the chat room. You just put in your first name, last name, and email address. And it is in a separate window, so it does tend to help if you have the webinar slides on one side, the chat room on the other. One of the big advantages of being in the chat room is you can download the webinar slides from this little link on the right-hand side there. So you can certainly pull that down from there. There is quite a lot of small writing in the slide, so it would be perhaps beneficial if you want to read the detail to download the webinar slides there. We do have a prize for the best question or the best tip we get asked during the webinar. We've got a very nice bottle of champagne here, or a box of chocolates, or indeed an Amazon gift card if you would prefer that. So that's carrying out in the chat room. We've got quite a good discussion going on there already. callcenterhelper.com/chat. But before we get going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a poll, and I'd just like to understand where everyone is currently on their AI strategy. So does your company have an AI strategy? Is it a very joined up strategy in place, like with a perhaps a central team? Do you have departmental strategy or strategies? Are you working on an AI strategy for your company, or do you not have one? Be quite interesting to see on this. David, are you expecting a lot of people to have a joined up strategy?
No, I'm probably not at this stage, but let's see. I think there's a lot of interest in lots of different parts of the business around AI. What I see from most clients that I talk to, they're still experimenting and working out what it is they're going to do. But one or two have got things like centers of excellence that are set up, and those are helping to spread the word across the business.
Indeed. Well, let's have a look. We've got 9% of the audience have a joined up strategy in place. 6% have a departmental strategy. 25% don't have a strategy at all, and 64% of people are working on it. So I guess actually attending this webinar would be quite useful if you are putting your strategy together. So I think that would be quite interesting. So that's probably a good good point to pass the baton across to David. And David, if you'd like to put your thoughts together on the best ways to use artificial intelligence in the contact center.
I will indeed. Thank you, Jonty. Let me sort of switch over to get this up and running. There we go. We should have slides up on screen. Brilliant.
We do indeed.
Okay, great to see everybody today, or not, but good to have you here. I think what I want to try and do for the next 20 minutes or so is just to go beyond the chatbot a little bit. I mean, I will talk about chatbots because they are such an important part of what's happening at the moment in the contact center. But think about what's coming in the near term in terms of AI developments, and I'll show you some views on my views on how that market is going to mature in different areas for the contact center. But really, it's about understanding what you need to think about to create that joined up strategy across your organization as well. So you create the long-term value from AI, and I talk about this whole issue between sort of augmenting your skills versus replacing sort of people, and why I think the augmentation is a much better way to start thinking about AI, and that will also counteract some of the fears that people have around the rise of the machines, etc. So hopefully that'll be useful, and I'll leave you with some golden rules that I talk to clients about when they're starting to think about their strategy, and hopefully those will resonate with you. So I want to start with a quick quote from Jack Ma, who is the founder of Alibaba. For those of you who don't know, that's the Chinese equivalent of eBay, and he talks a lot about sort of how our society is changing with the rise of AI, and this particular quote I think is interesting because it's about how do we teach our children unique things that the machines can't do and won't be able to do for many years. So we need to be educating them properly to give them those skills. In the same way, we need to be doing this within our organizations. So the machines are going to, the AI is going to sort of level the playing field in a lot of areas around processing customer interactions and analyzing data, and a lot of that work is going to be taken away and simplified. And so at the end of the day, the value in our organizations has to come from our people and skilling up our people to make us unique and different and have those differentiators from our competitors. So the message here, it's augment our skills. Let's just not think about just replacing them. And there's an important sort of model that we all should be aware of, at least as how we use data in our businesses, that help to illustrate this point further. This is, I suppose you call it the data value chain of how we take what essentially are symbols and sort of numbers that really mean very little, and turn them into information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom that helps us to make decisions, because it's all about taking data and making decisions that help us to move our business forward. And what we have in this process are people with skills at the left-hand side, the data scientists and data engineers, which are really sort of the ones who are sort of enabling sort of the technology to support our businesses of the future. But on the other side, we've got the operational experts making decisions, often in a vacuum. So there's a gap in the middle which we've been trying to close for a number of years. That means that the data scientists can get their insight in the right form across to people who need to make decisions, and the people making decisions can ask for information back from the data scientists in a way that makes sense, and they know what to ask for. So what we want to do is to use operational AI to help us make predictions and recommendations to support sort of better decision making, so we can make better decisions, faster decisions, more informed decisions. And that's where I see AI, whether it's in supporting an agent in terms of interaction, or whether it's forecasting workload and therefore resourcing. All these sort of things which we do in the contact center today, but not necessarily particularly well, or they take a lot of time. So how do you take the effort out of that and allow you to focus on decisions based on good data? Putting this AI into practice is about achieving those, building those bridges between the two aspects of our organizations. But putting things into practice doesn't always work as well as we would hope. And this is an example from the health industry. And you may have come across a company called Babylon Health. They are a well-funded tech startup in that space. They've done quite a lot of work with the NHS over the last few years, sort of trialing systems for triage and diagnosis. And I won't get into the details of what this graph on the left is really showing, but what you can see here is a trial where a number of doctors and the artificial intelligence systems were compared in terms of their performance. And as you can see, the AI system broadly, on average, performs similar to a number of the doctors in the survey. That's theory. When you put it into practice on an app or a messenger app, whatever, then and you're asking people to put in their symptoms and get the system to recommend what the conditions could be. This example shows that the system recommends costochondritis. When a doctor who sort of gets involved with this starts looking at the data and does a survey of other doctors, 90% say that's wrong, it's something else. And so it doesn't take very much to undermine the information that's being presented through these systems. And we need to be very careful about how we build trust in the systems, both from professionals and from end users, to ensure that people will come back and use these systems again. And we see this a lot already with chatbots, where people try them once, they don't get the actual conversation flowing, because the chatbot's not really thought about, not being built with sufficient consideration for all different ways people may say things, ask for things, etc. And people will just give up and pick up the phone. So this is not something which you fix at launch, as we said at the start of the session. Stephen was saying you've got to keep training these things, these systems, and do that, provide that feedback. But clearly, when you launch something as critical as a medical app, then you've got to make sure that you've done that testing and that training extremely thoroughly. Why are things happening so fast today? Well, here's an example of what has happened fast in the last few months. So this is a comparison of the machine learning engines that have been developed to process natural language. And you can sort of see these, each dot represents a team somewhere in the world that's been using the benchmark data from what's called the GLUE index to compare the performance of their machine learning engine to their AI engine to the human index. And as you can see, it's getting pretty close in theory in the lab. The challenge is obviously taking this now and opening it up to a much wider set of conversations that probably seem a lot simpler in terms of just open general conversation to you and I, but to machine actually more complex because there's so much context to think about.
Yeah. And David, do you see that one? I mean, if you look at the graph there, it looks like almost by sort of next month, April, May, it would have crossed over. Is that a sort of an exponential scale that will get close, but not quite, or do you expect that to actually cross over, that the machine would actually be better than the human benchmark?
I think it will cross over, and there'll be a lot of PR about that, I'm sure. I mean, it's not the only benchmark out there, but it's one that it is demonstrating that the Turing test is something which well, we've already sort of gone through that Turing test, where a machine can act, pretend to be a human and fool a human in that conversation. I think it's how you apply this. So at the end of the day, crossing over the line doesn't mean a great deal at this stage, because it's still the conversation bit is still quite hard, and that's going to be the challenge over the next couple of years, is to make the conversation piece work. And you know, we've got to this point because, you know, of what people talk about now as machine learning and neural networks. You know, we've had speech systems, we've had, you know, sort of vision systems for many years, and it's just in the last 3 to 5 years they've been the performance has just stepped up a gear because of the use of neural networks and machine learning to actually accelerate that. So we're getting to a point where commercial opportunities are going to increase because of this technology, and we could talk about some of those in a minute. But there are social risks, moral questions to be asked about, you know, how much you need to sort of explain to customers that this is a machine. In California, for instance, I think towards the end of this year, it will be illegal for a machine to communicate with a customer without telling the customer that they are a machine. So you know, governments and authorities are seriously thinking about this whole question. So I'd mentioned there, this is all about sort of neural networks and machine learning, augmenting sort of what some of the AI that we've had for years but didn't know we had. Just wanted to briefly touch on what this technology is about for those who haven't seen this before. I apologize that it's another picture of an animal, but it seems to be the one that makes it easier for people to understand. But here is a picture of a neural network. It's the 3 layers in the middle of this picture that form a network. And effectively, you can think of this as a series of nodes that are connected by connected to nodes in the next layer with varying strengths of connection. And that's in its sense models the way in which the brain works, where we're connecting neurons from one to the other. And the strength of those connections determine how much signal passes through that connection, and therefore how the output from that next layer is passed on to the layers beyond. And the way that connection strength is determined is by training a neural network. So at the moment, most of our neural networks that are in commercial applications are what's called trained by supervised learning, where we take in lots of patterns of whether it's animals or speech or just patterns of data, which could be, for example, information about customers that we've gathered, and give the machine an output that we want from this data input. So it could be, you know, this is a picture of a dog. You know, need to present the output and tell us that it's a dog, or chicken, etc. From a customer perspective, it could be, you know, that these are the characteristics of somebody who will buy product X. Okay, so we train it to recognize those characteristics against product X, and again, same for product Y. Now, when you then present the machine with some data it's not seen before, then hopefully it will give you the answer that you expect, that you want to say, actually, this customer will buy product X or product Y next, or this customer is a dog. But so the structure as a machine is called neural network. The process of training it is called machine learning, and deep learning is just it's just a phrase which encapsulates a more complex, bigger neural network that has more layers and allows more complex relationships to be captured and modeled. Now, we talked at the top of the hour about sort of how you need to train the network and then monitor that and improve it once you've gone live. And there's a challenge around operational AI, and that, you know, this is not something that you just switch on and let run. There's an emerging area of research which is called goal-directed adaptive behavior, where you don't actually train the engine at all, but you let it just learn itself based on being given a goal. So as you can see in this example, this is a lab experiment where the machine was told, you need to survive in the Pac-Man world, and speeded up a demo here showing how, you know, the Pac-Man doesn't know what to do. It just needs to know that when it makes a move, it needs to make a move that will keep it alive. And slowly, over a series of hours, it keeps playing the game itself and eventually learns what to do. and starts to win. Now, that's fine in the lab. When you come to this in the real world, you need to be a lot more careful, as Microsoft discovered when they launched chatbot about a year or so ago, which was unsupervised and just told to go and learn from the people around you in the world. Within a day, that people around it in the world had taught it to be racist and many other things, which are not particularly pleasant, and it was shut down. So that's why the human in the loop for businesses to actually monitor what's going on in our systems and learn from what's going on and put the human touch to those systems is really critical. And we need to set our thresholds particularly low to start with, to say, if there's any doubt about getting the right answer here, let's pass it to somebody to check, whether that's handing the customer over or in this case, just stopping the process. So it's really critical. Oh, we're still playing Pac-Man. Okay, so if we put this into the context of our contact centers, I break the application areas down into two groups: those that support contact management and those that support the operation management. So the actual contacts is handling an inbound or making outbound contacts with customers versus the improvement and day-to-day running of the contact center. And you can this technology is not something you just go and buy off the shelf. Generally, you don't go and buy an AI planning platform. It's all about embedding the capability of a neural network and machine learning into each of these areas. And so you can source this through vendors who have got the foresight to start building this into their products, or you can start looking at how you embed some of the toolkits that are out there in the world, with Google's, Amazon's, and others, into your operation. So there's a variety of ways to start sort of thinking about where does this technology come from. And this is my view of sort of where we currently are with each of these technologies. Apologies for the little robots. I just thought they were quite cute, so I had to use them. Bit of a stereotype for AI, but there you go. So this just shows solution maturity. Are we really looking at bespoke solutions that need to be built from scratch at this point, or are they quite packaged and something you can buy almost off the shelf? And where is the benefit sitting at the moment? Is it sort of in the emerging category, or are we seeing significant sort of business opportunity, business sort of case studies? And I think it's obvious from this that sort of most of those applications are still in the emerging space, and I've got some development work to do in both in terms of maturity from a package perspective and benefits. So I think for me, some of the key areas at the moment that we're seeing are obviously around the assistance and the bot areas. So agent assistance, thinking about whether it's a bot or other systems which are prompting the agent to support them in their processing of interaction to customers, or some of the self-service bots in texts. The text interactions are obviously starting to be quite well established now in terms of sort of vendors and alternatives to how you source that solution. I think the challenge is we're still learning about how to get the best out of these systems, and I'd say there's some way to go in terms of sort of the process of deploying this in a way that is cutting out large volumes of unnecessary contact, or assisting the agent to be really productive. Where I see this going in the next few years is I think there's some standout areas that we'll see. Agent assistance, I think, will be the one that matures most, primarily because it's a safe area where using our staff as sort of the test bed for applications and for proving things is going to be an important way to move this technology forward. But I think one of the key other areas is going to be around self-service, where we start to get some of the conversations right on the bots, and start to cut out some of those unnecessary contacts So it's reducing volume, and particularly around the speech side. So back to the example I showed earlier on around the glue index and where that's going, we will start to see sort of speech being used more effectively on phone channels, for example. So clients that I work with are experimenting with that now to actually take a bot and put it on the phone channel, and at a much lower cost and much more in a more controlled way than perhaps they've been able to do previously with traditional speech vendor solutions. So yeah, I think that's a real growth area. And then quality and coaching will be another one where we get a 360 loop back from the quality system where we're using speech analytics, which again has come on leaps and bounds because of the machine learning, to tie back straight back into coaching. So looking at what's worked previously for this agent in terms of improving their performance, what the gaps are now, what's worked for other agents, what are the recommendations back to the team leader and to the individual around coaching and development that will help them improve their performance further. So I think we'll start to see that. And then around the insight space, because of the advancements we've got in some of the tools that can help to actually sort of analyze the interactions with speech and text, we're going to be much more expecting our systems to give us more recommendations as opposed to just sort of good dashboards. So let's get to the next. We'll get to the next level where we're actually getting actions fed back to us, not just data. And I think that's going to be really important and a big move forward. So let's just quickly look at some of those in a little bit more detail. The key one I want to start with is something called Google Duplex, which you may have seen already if you've been watching what Google's been doing over the last couple of years. This is a bot making an outbound call to a customer to make a booking, to a business to make a booking. And so this is a whole interaction where the customer does not know that they're speaking to a bot, but it's a really sort of interesting application. Over to you, John. Okay, thank you, Jonty. So I guess, let's get back. There we go. So from what you can see there, there's some human-like touches in that conversation where the machine goes, wait while it's waiting for the person at the other end to look up in the system. There's some sort of complexity around the timings and what the person wants. So that's not a conversation that was put together in one go. I think there has been months and months of work to get that working to that level. But it illustrates what you could do with outbound contacts, say to follow up insurance renewal quotes, or to book appointments for engineer visits and things like that with customers. So there's some great opportunities, again, for recognizing that people need to be made aware they're talking to machines. Another quick one, the use of not just video but AI sitting sort of behind that video to look at damage in a claims process for an automobile. So using it to triage and determine the severity of the damage relative to what's on the claim versus, and also to work out which is the best garage or place to actually get the car repaired. So this allows the agent to focus on the conversation with the customer and the interaction with the customer, rather than thinking about the detail of the process, because that's taken care of. Again, it's sort of augmenting the relationship, the agent time with AI, and changing what the agent can focus on. This one is about the coaching process. This is called CoachBot. And it's not trying to replace the interaction that team leaders and staff have and people have with their peers and their team, but trying to encourage the conversations that actually get squeezed out day to day. So looking at the data that's coming out about performance, looking at sort of operational things that are happening. The CoachBot is recommending who the team leader should be talking to, and recommending what the actions are that the agents should be doing to improve their performance, but also to share success with their team members. So there's a whole range of things that this bot can do, but it's about nudging those behaviours and trying to drive those conversations to help improve the performance and spot all the early warning signs of things going wrong as well. And another one which is sort of building on the agent side of things is on the sort of the human in the loop piece, where we're perhaps using our agents who've got the expert knowledge to help improve our AI. This is about an IT help desk chatbot, which is good at doing many things, but there will be points where it's unable to answer the question, and it will hand that off to an agent. What this one does is it records the process that the agent then goes through to solve the problem, and then goes back to the business owner and says, hey, I didn't know what to do with this. This is what the agent did. Shall I do that in future? So it's quite clever. Obviously you can tune it even further once you look at what the system recorded, but it's using the business expertise to help improve its own performance. And then finally, just one that is about thinking about how you transform journeys end to end rather than just a particular point of the journey. So the insurance sector is one that is ripe for applications like this, where we make it much easier to get insured and much easier to get paid when we have a claim. And because of the AI capability to embed in lots of different parts of the process and not just sort of tackle one problem, you can start to sort of think about how to reinvent your journeys with AI, and link the organization together with AI, which is why you should be thinking about it as an organizational opportunity and not just a thing in customer service. So we're starting to see onboarding processes and processes like this with the claims, where you can get paid within 3 minutes, and your approval is given within 8 seconds of reviewing the information you've given. So Lemonade's in the US. I'm sure we'll start to see examples of this in the UK very soon. So there's a lot of information there. I just wanted to finish on the golden rules that I talk to clients about. Hopefully they summarize what you've seen. First of all, it's a journey for the whole organization. So some of you have started to sort of link your organization strategy together, and I think that's really important. And there's certainly a push to try and do things very quickly. Certainly experiment, but don't think you're behind anybody else, because there's a lot of opportunities that people have just not even contemplated yet that we could use AI for. So you need to find the right ones for you and for your organization, and not just copy somebody else because sort of it seems to be the in thing to do. Think about the business question first. Is AI actually a solution you're looking for? And that's always the place I start when I talk to people. So it's great, but it may not be the fastest way to get what you want to deliver, to achieve. Thirdly, the right data is more important than the method. So really, the quality of the data that you are feeding into a machine learning engine is really important. There's all sorts of things to think about in terms of is the data biased? Is it sort of complete? Have you got all the right variables in there? And actually, the way in which these toolkits are now being developed by Google and Amazon and others is that the science behind the machine learning is something which is becoming less and less important. And what's really important is actually the ability to think about the problem and get the data right. And then there's various models that you can run that through, but what actually is happening in that model is actually less critical to you relative to the answers that you you get out and how the model performs when you use it. Be agile, fast, fail fast, and deliver success incrementally. I think this is the rule for a lot of our operations today. This is not a big program. This is about taking small steps, but thinking big. And that's why I sort of say, you need to learn, you need to fail fast and move on. Good design is still critical. The machines do not design themselves, despite the example I just showed you a minute ago of the IT support desk. The actual journey, the conversations that we're creating is still about how do you make this work for people and customers. I start from the perspective of sort of designing backwards. What's the ideal conversation or interaction? And then come back to, well, what can the technology do? You then start to think about what the gaps are and understand the impact of not being able to do things in an ideal way, and in that way you know what the trade-offs are that you're making. And finally, think augmentation, not just replacement. So what is it that our systems are going to do? How do we go beyond the we're just going to get rid of jobs message, which seems to be a big one, and start thinking about augmenting our staff and adding value properly to our organization. So I hope that's been useful. We demystify AI in Humanotics. Hope you feel a little bit more demystified today, and happy to answer questions later and talk further.
David, thank you very much for that indeed. I think there's some great words of advice there, and certainly in terms of the the golden rules of how to do artificial intelligence. So we're just going to jump across to the chat room. We've had a lot of feedback going in, quite a large number of questions going through. The first one comes in from Angel, who says, with controlling costs being a huge focus for contact centers, how do you make space to free up people to manage artificial intelligence? A recent case study I saw the benefits were 7 to 10 years in the making, and there was an entire team whose sole focus was on the artificial intelligence. David, I don't know if you've any thoughts on how do you make up the time to get the data right, I guess.
Well, I suppose the key thing for me is that you need to involve the front line in part of in all of this process. I don't think it should be a separate team sat somewhere else in an ivory tower working on this. It's each like any other project. Anything you do should be broken down into a bite-sized project that you can see a business case for. The chatbot should have its own business case, yes, and from there you will start to sort of demonstrate the success and build on that. So I think anybody that approaches this with a 7 to 10 year view of what they're trying to do, I think is probably looking at this in the wrong way, because in a year's time what you could do will be very different. You'll be able to, then the opportunities will be different, and the potential will, the direction will shift. So don't know whether that sort of answers the question.
I guess in that one it also depends on why you're doing it. If it is for cost reduction processes, then that's going to be different. I think it's like when cash machines came in for the first time, they weren't brought in to save the banks money. They were there to provide better out of hours service. It later transpired that it saved money. So I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And if you're trying to increase customer service and availability, it will get a very different answer than if you're trying to save money. Graham, very interesting point. Stephen, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on it. How do you develop artificial intelligence so it knows when it cannot help any further and pass the call on to a live person?
Thanks, Jonty. That's an interesting question, primarily because I think to develop AI to do that is not necessarily the right approach. What you need to look at is the questions that are being asked. Set yourself a threshold. If the customer is not getting the question answered in 3 attempts, that's when you should have that capability then to advance to an agent. Conversely, focus on the journey. What is the journey that you're trying to get your bots to deliver? And make sure that at the point in time when the journey hits a snag, then pass it on to an agent. So there's 2 different ways of looking at something like that.
Indeed. So we've got a comment in from Stephen, who says the difficulty I experience is the chatbots are difficult to set for very personalized answers. I guess this is sort of the one size fits all. Is this, David, do you think something to do with maturity, or is it lack of programming, or not a deep enough knowledge set?
Yeah, I think there's a combination here of how much you build in. I mean, obviously we all try and build the happy path first when we're designing these journeys, but there's so many ways in which humans can take the system off track, throwing in curveballs, and it's how many of those curveballs can you catch, and that's effort. That's not just something which the system does by itself. That needs people involved. So you've got to walk towards a goal of I guess in a self-service perspective, for example, what's your containment that you're trying to achieve, and looking at how you can shift that containment rate forward of people who don't need to speak to a customer representative afterwards. And that's quite a hard thing to measure sometimes, because it may be that they quit from the chatbot and ring back. The technology is good. It's still not perfect at doing that, at interpreting customer needs, because there's so many different ways that we can ask for something. I think the example of a Commonwealth Bank in Australia, they got something like 2,000 different ways programmed into their chatbots where people can ask for a bank balance. You think that'd be straightforward, but they've recognized that there's that many different ways that people could say it, and they've had to encode all those. So that takes time.
Just a couple of ones I want to cover off now. Bale has said, personally, I find that chatbots are a very poor use of AI, as they're duplicating functionality that already exists in portals, and it's too complex to create all the paths for a bot to deal with for anything other than simple queries. Certainly, when I think of artificial intelligence, I tend to think more in terms of search functionality than chatbots. So maybe that may be an area to look at, is look at self-service and search rather than necessarily chatbot as a starting point. A final question for this section from Nitin, who says, can AI help with complex and lengthy calls that relate to online banking, mobile banking, debit card claims, amongst more challenging calls? David, I think so far you've really talked about automating sort of simpler processes.
And I think that's where I would certainly start. I think to try and do anything complex, you're just not going to get there quick enough to actually prove the value. So if the process is quite well defined but lengthy, then that may be something that can be looked at. So, for example, working with one client at the moment who is looking at putting in a process for a phone chatbot to take details of a change of vehicle for insurance purposes. So I've just bought a new car. Now you think, gosh, that sounds quite complicated, but when you boil it down, it's not too difficult, and it's just about ensuring that you only get the right calls going into that process. So you're looking at the ones that you won't be able to solve by using operational data to say, well, this customer is on a particular type of policy, which means we can't solve it that way. So let's capture them and bring them to the contact center before they get stuck in the self-service. So that's quite important. It's not just about trying to do everything in self-service. It's use your data to be intelligent and pick the right customers to get into that process.
Indeed. Well, we're going to jump across to a poll now, and we've had a lot of discussion on chatbots. So just going to ask chatbots, when do you think that chatbots are going to reach your company? Have they already reached the company? Do you expect it to be within 12 months? Do you expect it to be within 5 years? Do you think it'll be over 5 years? Or do you think there'll never be a place for chatbots in your company? I think it's going to be quite a fascinating. I think I answered this asked this question, I think, 2 years ago, and there's certainly lots of people down at the 5+ years or never. Stephen, any thoughts on where you think the winning vote's going to be on here?
I think it'll be somewhere between 12 months and 5 years. Gartner's predicting that we're going to be embracing new technologies continually over the next months and years. So I think that's somewhere where it's going to be, between 12 and 5.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the results. Sample size here of 114. 31% of people say they have already reached the contact center, 26 within 12 months, 31% within 5 years, and only 5% say it will never happen. So that's quite a range of opinions there. Well, running on in time, so it's a good time to hand it across to Stephen Kennedy. And Stephen, if you'd like to take your thoughts through on the best ways that we can use artificial intelligence in the contact center.
Sure, thanks very much, John T. David, thanks very much for an amazing introduction there into the AI side of things. What I'm going to be going through today is a little bit about how, or what some of the best practices are that you can actually use AI in the contact center itself. We're going to look at some interesting aspects that eGain present. We're going to look at a customer who's been using AI in the call center for quite some time, approximately 7 odd years that they've actually had it running very, very successfully. And we'll look at some of their wins that they've actually managed to achieve. Before I do start that, just very, very quickly, eGain has had artificial intelligence chatbot capability for probably about 15 years. So it's not something that's new to us as an organization, and it's something that quite a few of our customers have adopted really early on in the process. So as I mentioned earlier on, Gartner is going to predict that around about 2022, we're going to see that there is a huge amount of our customer base and the interactions that we have with those that are going to be using evolving or emerging technology, specifically looking at the chatbot capability with machine learning and the ability to guide and encourage customers to go through a specific way of doing things. And I think as David rightly pointed out, my apologies, you've got to think about a complete journey and not just a little piece of it all the time. And quite often what a lot of our customers do is they will start at a very, very small location. They will look at a simple implementation of it and then grow that implementation out. And I think that's important. You cannot boil the ocean from day one. You've got to break it down into piecemeals. You've got to measure your success. Where you have got a failure, you've got to move on beyond that. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more. You'll also find that there will be different types of companies around us where people are going to be a lot more keen to explore new technologies, and they're going to do things a lot quicker. And as the channels change, it's going to become a rapid way of doing things. So if we look at that whole AI in the contact center capability, there are 3 major components to it from the way we look at things. You've got the machine learning side, which is all around that intent, understanding that customer, what they're asking for, why. You've got the AI component where you're bringing process guidance, you're bringing intelligent search, you're bringing the natural language capabilities together. And then on the outside, you've got the knowledge base, which is going to actually form a critical part. And I think one of the questions that we were talking about is that whole training concept. By using a knowledge base that you already have had in existence or that you have got in existence already, the whole ML and AI piece becomes so much shorter than what we're going to expect it to be. And I think we've got some customers who, within months after just deploying a bot on a website, they've actually seen some phenomenal responses, some phenomenal behavior changes in their customer base, to the extent that they're saving probably about 88,000 odd calls per month. But we'll talk about that again in a little while later on as well. So David mentioned the fact that the data has got to be right. You've got to look at the right tool for the right task, and I think that extends very much so within the artificial intelligence realm. There are certain places where you cannot use AI to solve a particular problem, and you need to go back to the traditional self-service side of things. Or conversely, you need to make sure that it's only those areas that you can deal with it. The AI does make the right choice for you to actually deploy and become successful. It's not the silver bullet that's going to solve every single task that you have. And you do need to realize that certain aspects of your customer engagement, certain aspects of your agent engagement as well is applicable to an AI, but some of it is not. And I think by adjusting and by becoming that agile and being able to make the changes quickly, you'll be able to move on from those, measure your failure, and make your success stronger. To give you an example, to talk about one of our existing customers, this is EE and BT. When they started out with us 7 or 8 years ago, they had a huge challenge on their hands with the variation of performance within their contact center. So there were multiple staff. They have something like 10,000 staff, and you can imagine the variation in performance. So they were looking at a means to try and level that playing field and make sure that everybody could deal with a call in exactly the same fashion. And they had some interesting stats that we actually worked through, but we'll talk about that just now. Their other challenge was that they had 4 knowledge tools, 4 old tools that were there and existent, had been there for a long time. And how do you encourage an agent to look at a specific one? How do they choose which one they were looking at? You're talking on a call, you're talking to somebody, and how do we get around that? Part of that whole artificial intelligence is to remove that layer of where do I go? It's to find that single source, that single place, to go and ask a question. And it really doesn't matter where the information comes from, whether it's business intelligence of your customer or whether it's knowledge of how to do something. It is all presented to an agent in a single location through that AI mode. So the solution was for them to create an AI-guided knowledge system, which they called Albert. Unfortunately, they wanted to use Einstein, but Einstein as a trade name was already utilized. So they chose to call it Albert. And there have been a number of iterations of Albert as Albert has grown and as the success of Albert has been measured. So as we just go through what they actually did deliver in the end, was that they rolled out and they were looking at training for approximately 10,000 advisors in the UK. They have something like 500 retail stores around the country that are currently using Albert in a situation with the customer as they walk into the store as well. So it's not just only for your advisor sitting behind a telephone call, but it can be used in a real-time situation as well within a store. When they started out, they had something like 20,000 individual articles across those 4 knowledge bases. They brought those together into 10 structured AI-guided help case bases. In other words, this was the process that they needed to go through to solve that particular problem. They completely overhauled all their knowledge, and they made sure that every single piece of knowledge adhered to a standard. It was well presented, it was well coached, it was well worded, to make sure that it doesn't matter who you were, you could pick up and you could assist somebody very, very easy. It was clear, it was concise. One of the other things that they did was they looked at content ownership and made sure that there was accountability. And this comes back to one of the questions that were asked, is all about that ownership and how do you make sure that it is fresh all the time and maintains that up-to-date look and feel. And AI, much like knowledge in the early days, if it is not kept up to date, it's going to get stale. And I think David did mention that at some point in his discussion as well. They also believe that there is a single knowledge team, whether it's the knowledge that's being provided through to an AI or through to a chatbot, or whether it's knowledge that's being used within your contact center, or it's self-service knowledge. By having a single source of knowledge, you are making sure that no matter how a question is asked, whether it is through the chatbot, whether it is through the telephone call and an agent or not, it's that single place where they're going to get information. Finally, the last thing that they did was they automated that contact reason capture, so that part of the AI process was to make sure they got the right reason for the capture, for the call that came through. And that then gave them the ability to ensure that they were fixing problems at the right place. If it was a billing query, let's go back to the bill and make sure that we've got it stabilized, we make sure it's right. One of the examples that they used for us was the HTC handheld mobile telephones. They had a technical fault in the core code, and they used their intelligence, they used their automated contact reasoning to actually deliver that fix, and went to HTC and, please, can you fix this particular piece? And it was through that they were then able to remove that call totally. So if you look at it from a success factor, okay, they discovered that when the AI was used, they were getting something like an FCR measurement at 85%. Where it wasn't used, it was delivered at 62%. That change of 23 percentage points equates to a 37% improvement in that FCR. So by using AI, leveling it across the 10,000 agents, they were able to get that very, very quickly. Their customer satisfaction improved, and please notice that it's a 30-point increase here in NPS score. And that is a huge jump just by making sure that the customers were getting the right answer at the right time through AI, strengthening that concept of it's the right days that you need. Then the last one is that whole concept of training. It's removing that training difficulty away and getting people up to speed so much quicker, so much more efficiently. As we move away from EE and we start to have a look at what we're doing with regard to customers in the general sense and AI, at the moment down the bottom, we talk about the run, we talk about what's already in existence. We then talk about working with customers to identify where the change can occur, how using knowledge and AI is then able to guide and improve the process that you're doing. Translate process to interactive guidance, giving people an understanding. If you look at training, that's where you're going to start to see that training benefit. And then the final one is tying this all together with machine learning, with business analytics and analytics, to transform, to then start to learn, to predict and look at the insights that are then driving product innovation that you have as an organization. And then finally, eGain is all about that AI value in 30 days. This is a free offering that we have where we actually will help you prove the value of AI that it can bring to your business right throughout the process, guiding and looking after everything. Jonty, if I could hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So just going to do a quick poll. If anyone would like to have a demonstration of the eGain artificial intelligence solution, if you'd just like to pop that into the poll box, and I'm sure Stephen will be able to arrange that for you. So if you'd just like to pop that into the box now, would be good. And we're going to jump across now and have a look at some of the top tips and questions that have come back. And so we'll just have a look at the first tip, and that is Bilbo says, if you're creating a chatbot, generally it's a bad idea to make people think it has the conversational abilities of a human. That makes people ask a whole bunch of unhelpful and tangential questions. Make it very clear that it's a bot with finite abilities. Then they'll use it as the door it's designed to be. David, your thought? I think David's on mute now.
I think it's about a balance. I mean, I think this is right, but the balance is that if we make machines sort of too much sound like machines, then the responses that people give are very stilted and very sort of hard to use. So we have to keep asking more and more questions. So it's getting the right level of conversation going, but still keeping the customer on track. And there's a real skill in the design of that. So yeah, that's where I think there's a lot of work to be done yet.
Michael says, and Stephen, have you got a thought on this one? How far do you think AI will go in the contact center world, given that most humans, when we dial a number, we prefer another human interaction over a machine? Do you think we'll ever be able to replace most contact centers and people tasks with AI, Steve?
Personally, I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. People like talking to people, and I think that's important. And this brings me back to something that David mentioned earlier on. It's about augmentation. It's not about replacement. It's about that ability to assist the person in getting the right information quickly and effectively.
Indeed. We've had a comment from Graham. Graham says, I see AI doing a lot of the mundane tasks and then using the skilled agents to provide value where it's needed. Certainly, we've seen a big increase now recently in average handling time, as self-service is taking more of those mundane tasks. A quick question in from Celine. It says, how do AI developments compete with self-service developments? In the example we talked about earlier, taking an appointment is now mainly a self-service online booking. Do you think it's a sort of a combination, David?
Yeah, I think it's where you are at a particular time. I think if you're in front of the then for the foreseeable future, you're probably going to make a booking that way. And I was talking to a travel company this week, and they said we get 1% of our less than 1% of our bookings made over the phone now. So you wouldn't you wouldn't sort of try and build sort of AI into the contact center to support that from a phone perspective. You know, it's firmly established that that's how people choose to do these things. If you're in a car and you want to do something, interact with a business, then how can AI help you on the voice channel that way? So what do people like to call about? So it requires really understanding your customers, the behavior, and you know, what they need at a particular moment in time based on where they are and scenarios they're in.
Indeed. Well, we've reached the top of the almost the top of the hour. So if you'd just like to put in the chat room, what did you like best about today's webinar? The winning tip for today comes in from Bales, who says, a bot is just an interface. If it's hooked up to the right resources, then it can be very useful. For example, if it's linked up to a search function, which has indexed all your company's documentation, it creates instant access to useful information that can help to improve first contact resolution. So we've got a little survey at the end of the webinar. If you'd just like to fill that in, you can watch the recording later on today. And I'd just like to say thank you to our two guest speakers. David, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you. It's been really good.
Thank you, Stephen, for joining us.
Thank you, John. It's been great.
And thank you to everyone in the audience. We'll be back here next week looking at call monitoring strategies. So thanks very much, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.